In the line of work that I do, it's a breakthrough if you can get white people to acknowledge that our race privileges us in this society, right? That is like the second coming, to get white folks to admit that we are privileged by our race. But even that begins to get superficial. And you'll hear white people say, just because of the color of my skin, you know, I have these things, as if this is just an accident that happens. And I want to take us deeper. I want to take us inside this skin. My psychosocial development was inculcated in the water of white supremacy. That is what I call this system. I don't mean the KKK. I mean a system in which whiteness and white people are central and seen as inherently superior to people of color. My personality was formed in that water. My worldview was formed in that water. I didn't choose it. It isn't my fault. I'm not racked with guilt about it, but I am responsible for changing it, because the default of our society is the reproduction of racism. It's built into every system and every institution. And if we just live our lives and carry on in the most comfortable ways for us, we will necessarily reproduce it. There is no neutral space. Inaction is a form of action. One of the most effective adaptations of racism since the civil rights era is this idea of a racist is a bad person, and if you're not racist, you're a good person. What I call the good-bad binary. And we can all fill it in, right? So if you're racist, then you're prejudiced and mean-spirited and bigoted and ignorant and Southern and probably drive a pickup truck. So we got some classism in there, right? This is our racist. And if you're not racist, you're good and you're progressive and you're open-minded and you're educated and you're Northern. And this binary is probably the #1 construct that keeps racism today in place and makes it nearly impossible to talk to white people about racism. The defensiveness we have comes from this binary. What we hear is, you just said I was a bad person. And so this binary sets it up to be mutually exclusive. You cannot be a good person and be complicit with racism. So you'll notice in the news when racism gets talked about, they'll bring in the evidence they'll have to defend the person that's being accused of racism is, but he's a really nice person. Right? Because again, it's mutually exclusive. We have to understand racism as a system that we're all a part of. You know, I often, in my trainings, after I've kind of laid out kind of how racism works, I'll ask people of color, how often have you given white people feedback on our inevitable, unaware and unintentional, but inevitable racism, and have that go well for you? And, you know, there's eye rolls and laughter, and basically the answer is never, right? It's virtually impossible for people of color to give us feedback, because that binary sets us up to defend, right? I must, at all costs, deflect and establish that I am not racist, right? And that makes it so that we can't examine the reality of the society that we live in. And then I'll follow up and ask this question. So what would your daily life be like? This is a question I ask the people of color. If you could simply give us feedback when we step in it, which we inevitably will, and have us receive that with grace, reflect, and seek to do something different, what would your daily life be like? And recently, a man of color in the room, there was a pause, and then he said, it would be revolutionary.